The wind came hard out of the west that evening, carrying dust and the smell of rain that never quite reached the ground. Martha Caldwell pulled her shawl tighter as she guided the mule toward the creek, her 2 children trailing behind her with tin buckets clanking softly at their sides. Life had not been kind to Martha since her husband died 3 winters earlier, crushed beneath a spooked horse while driving cattle for a man who never even bothered to attend the burial. Since then, every sunrise had been a quiet bargain with hardship, work from dawn to dark, stretch what little food there was, and pray the land would give just enough to keep her children alive. They lived in a leaning cabin outside the town of Red Willow, far enough that no one bothered them, close enough that Martha could still sell eggs or mended clothes when luck allowed. Her son, Jacob, was 11 and already carried himself like a grown man, though his boots were worn thin and too large. Her daughter, Annie, was 8, sharp-eyed and stubborn, with a way of asking questions that made Martha smile even on her hardest days. It was Jacob who saw him first. "Ma," he said, stopping short near the creek bank. "There's someone there." Martha's hand went instinctively to the small knife at her belt. Travelers sometimes camped near the water, but they usually made themselves known. She stepped closer, scanning the tall grass and cottonwoods. The man lay half in the mud, half in the shallow water, his horse collapsed a few feet away, dead or near it. He wore fine clothes, though torn and soaked dark with blood. His hat was gone, his dark hair plastered to his forehead, and his chest rose in shallow, uneven breaths. "He's hurt bad," Annie whispered. Martha hesitated. Helping a stranger could be dangerous. It could cost them precious time, food, even their lives. But she also knew what it was to be left alone in pain, unseen and uncared for. "Jacob," she said finally, her voice steady despite the knot in her chest. "Go check if he's alive. Careful now." Jacob approached slowly, crouched, and pressed 2 fingers to the man's neck like he'd seen the town doctor do once. He looked back, eyes wide. "He's alive, Ma." "Barely." Martha closed her eyes for a moment. Then she nodded. "All right. We're not leaving him." Between the 3 of them, they managed to drag the man out of the creek and onto firmer ground. It was hard work. The man was tall and solid, even half dead, and Martha's arms burned with the effort. When they finally got him propped against a tree, she tore a strip from her underskirt to press against the wound in his side. "Bandits," she murmured, seeing the gunshot tear through his coat. Red Willow had been plagued by them lately, bold enough now to rob even wealthy cattlemen on the open range. They couldn't leave him there. The nearest doctor was miles away, and the man wouldn't last the night. "Jacob," Martha said, making a decision that would echo through the rest of their lives, though she didn't know it yet. "We're taking him home." Getting him to the cabin took hours. They fashioned a rough litter from branches and the mule's harness, resting often, whispering encouragement to one another. The sky darkened, stars pricked through the purple dusk, and still they pressed on. When they finally laid the man on Martha's narrow bed, she set the children to work. Jacob boiled water. Annie fetched clean rags. Martha cleaned the wound as best she could, her hands trembling only a little as she dug the bullet out with a pair of old tweezers. "If he lives," Annie said softly, watching her mother work, "will he remember us?" Martha smiled faintly. "That's not why we're helping him, sweetheart." The man did live, though the fever nearly took him twice. For days he drifted in and out of consciousness, muttering names Martha didn't recognize and clutching at the sheets as if holding on to life by sheer will alone. She fed him spoonfuls of broth made from the last of their chicken, wiped his brow, and prayed over him at night when the children slept. On the 4th morning, he opened his eyes fully for the first time. They were sharp eyes, a clear blue that took in the low ceiling, the cracked walls, and finally Martha herself, seated beside the bed. "You're awake," she said gently. He swallowed. "Where?" "My home," Martha replied. "You were hurt." We found you by the creek. He tried to move and winced. My horse? She shook her head. I'm sorry. He closed his eyes briefly, then opened them again. Thank you, he said, his voice rough but sincere. Most folks would have taken my boots and left me. Martha smiled a little sadly. Most folks haven't buried a husband. Over the next week, the man grew stronger. His name, he said, was Samuel Whitaker. He didn't say much else about himself, and Martha didn't ask. Whatever he'd been before, he was now a man who needed care, and she gave it without question. The children warmed to him quickly. Jacob listened wide-eyed to his stories of cattle drives and distant places. Annie brought him flowers and corrected his grammar when he spoke too roughly. You're kind, Samuel told Martha one evening as the sun dipped low and painted the cabin walls gold. Kinder than you have to be. She shrugged. Kindness doesn't cost anything. Not until it does. When Samuel was finally able to stand, leaning heavily on a makeshift cane, he insisted on helping with chores. He chopped wood slowly, fed the mule, and mended a broken fence post with surprising skill. You've done this before, Martha observed. He smiled, a small, almost sad smile. I've done a lot of things. Weeks passed. Samuel's strength returned, and with it, a restlessness. Martha saw it in the way he gazed toward the horizon, in the way his jaw tightened when distant riders passed on the road. One morning, he saddled the mule and packed his few remaining belongings. You're leaving, Annie said, her lower lip trembling. Samuel knelt with a grunt, ignoring the pain, and met her eyes. I have to. There are things waiting for me. Martha stood in the doorway, her heart heavier than she expected it to be. You owe us nothing, she said, meaning it. He shook his head. I owe you my life. I don't know how to repay that yet. He pressed a small leather pouch into her hand. It held a few coins, more money than she'd seen in months, but still not enough to change much. Thank you, she said quietly. Samuel mounted up, paused, then looked back. If you ever need help, he said, ask for Samuel Whitaker. And then he was gone, a lone rider swallowed by dust and distance. Life returned to its familiar rhythm. The coins Samuel left helped for a while, but winter came early, cruel and unyielding. The roof leaked. The mule grew thin. There were nights when Martha lay awake, listening to the children breathe, wondering how much longer she could hold everything together. One cold morning, Jacob came running from the road, breathless. Ma! There's riders coming. A lot of them. Fear clenched Martha's chest. Bandits. Soldiers. Either could mean trouble. But when the riders came into view, they were well-dressed, their horses strong and sleek. At their head rode a familiar figure. Samuel Whitaker dismounted before the cabin, his movements confident now, his clothes fine and clean. Behind him stretched a small procession of wagons. Martha stared. Samuel? He smiled, wide and unguarded. Hello, Martha. What's all this? She asked, barely able to take it in. An apology, he said. And a promise kept. He gestured, and men began unloading supplies, sacks of flour, barrels of grain, tools, blankets. Another man produced papers, official-looking and stamped. Samuel took Martha aside. I didn't tell you who I was, he said quietly. I'm one of the largest cattle owners in 3 counties. When I was shot, I was riding alone to think. Foolish, I know. Martha felt dizzy. You don't owe us. I know, he interrupted gently. That's why this isn't payment. It's gratitude. He handed her the papers. This land, he said, indicating the fields around the cabin, it's yours now. Properly deeded. And if you're willing, I'd like to help you turn it into something better." Tears blurred Martha's vision. "Why?" she whispered. Samuel looked toward the children, who stood staring at the wagons in wonder. "Because when I was dying," he said, "you didn't see a rich man or a poor one. You saw someone who needed help. That changed me." In the months that followed, everything changed. With Samuel's help, the cabin was repaired, the land fenced, the fields planted. Jacob learned to ride a fine horse. Annie went to school in town. Martha found herself laughing more, standing straighter, believing again in a future she'd long thought impossible. Samuel visited often, never overstepping, always respectful. Over time, a quiet affection grew between him and Martha, built not on rescue or debt, but on shared understanding and trust. One evening, as the sun set over a land that finally felt like home, Martha realized that saving a dying man by a creek had not just saved him. It had saved them all.